Welcome back. As Rocio and I noted, the Latino Corporate Directors Association has teamed up with Latinas in Tech to inspire and inform Latina tech professionals to reach new heights and consider what corporate board service looks like. Corporate directors are committed to paying it forward for the next generation. I am pleased to introduce our dynamic panel. We have with us Sylvia Acevedo, who is a rocket scientist, literally, right? She worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and in top executive roles at Apple, Dell, IBM, to name a few. In her previous role, Sylvia pivoted to the nonprofit sector as CEO of Girl Scouts of the USA. Today, she serves on the boards of Qualcomm Inc. and Credo Semiconductor Inc. Next, we have Anna Pinczuk. She is Chief Development Officer at Anaplan, a software and cloud-based provider. In her previous role, Anna was President and General Manager leading Point Next at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. She serves on the boards of Aptiv Inc. and Five9. So let's get started. First, let's hear from Sylvia and Anna about their personal and professional journeys. So we'll start with Sylvia. Tell us about your background, where you grew up, and your path to pursuing a STEM field. Sylvia.
Thanks, Esther, and it's great to be on this panel. Thanks for all of you coming here and watching this. So I grew up in southern New Mexico. All my grandparents were from Mexico. My mom was born in Mexico. My dad was born in El Paso, Texas. When I grew up in Las Cruces, it was a small rural town, and my family struggled paycheck to paycheck. And for a while, we lived with family members, 6 kids, 5 adults, 1 bathroom. Then we got a rent house on a dirt street. So when you think about that little girl from a Spanish-speaking household, you do wonder how she became a rocket scientist. And I have to say, I'm really grateful for my experience with Girl Scouts. They really helped me learn about how do you create opportunity, confidence, and then also STEM. I was earning my science badge and I kept failing. I failed 6 times to get my rocket up, but because I was in an all-girl environment, they didn't say, oh, rockets aren't for you. They kept saying, how do you make it work? And finally, I got that rocket up in the sky and I said, I can do science, I can do math. So like any kid, I started doing more math. And the more math you do, the better you get. The better you get, the more math you do. And I got so good at math, I became a rocket scientist. I was able to work at JPL. And after that, I went to Stanford and earned my master's in engineering, and then got into the tech industry that was just booming.
Wow, literally a rocket scientist. Thank you, Sylvia. Anna.
Yeah, so well, I love that story, Sylvia, and I can relate to your story as well. I'm originally from Argentina, so I grew up in Argentina. My parents are almost rocket scientists. I have a physicist as a father and a biologist as a mother. And while we were in Argentina, my parents were professors, and there was a coup d'etat, in Argentina in the 70s. And so we actually had to leave Argentina as part of that. And we went through Chile and Peru and landed in Kennedy Airport with nothing really. So not that dissimilar, the story of having to start again in a new land. But my parents were professors, and given their education, they imparted that on me as well. And by the way, I grew up thinking that everybody was a scientist. So when I was in high school, math was something that I just had to do. I didn't think it was anything special. Frankly, it was an expectation of me. And so I decided to go into engineering primarily because I loved airplanes. I would go, my dad would talk to me about drag and lift, when I was in high school. And so we would go to to Newark Airport and take a look at the planes go by. And I really wanted to learn more about that. So I studied mechanical and aerospace engineering in school. That's what really got me into tech. Once I got into tech, though, I realized that it's not just about the engineering, but it's also about the business side and the people side. And so I continued, like Sylvia, I continued to learn and get other degrees, right, to be able to sort of round out that profile. But that's how I got into engineering.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anna. Well, let's stay with Anna for the next question and then go to Sylvia. So Anna, what were, some of the qualities and skills that anchored you to advance in your career and reach the C-suite? Along the way, what advice do you have for our Latinas in the audience?
The first thing that I learned, Esther, was that it's really important to be really good at what you do to start. Fundamentally, at least in my career, it was really important to be very proficient in the things that I was doing in my job. And it's that proficiency, that really allowed me to, in effect, earn the right to do more. And so I would start there. It wasn't, frankly, until like in my 30s, frankly, that I learned that building a network and getting a set of mentors and advocates was important. It took me a while because, frankly, as a Latina, I kind of grew up thinking that I had to sort of do things by myself, that I had to, that the harder I worked and the more I did, right, I would eventually, get the rewards. And it was really talking to other people and learning from mentors, in my late 20s and 30s, that allowed me to sort of look at a bigger picture of what I could be. I think, in addition to building a set of mentors, I think this concept of resilience is important for Latinas and really for women in general. And frankly, as I listened to Sylvia's story and maybe my story, we learn to be resilient from a young age, right? We sort of have to fight for what we want, and that becomes very helpful in a career, right? Because as Sylvia says, you fail, right? There's things where you're going to fail, and you have to get right back up and go get focused and try them again, or figure out what your next path is, right? So I would suggest continue to be, really good at what you do. Surround yourself by people that are going to help you and advocate, right? And then, recognize that failure is going to be part of your path, right? And that you've got to just keep going. Know that you can learn what you need to learn, and that, you can really attain the goals that you set out for yourself.
That's terrific. So some amazing lessons learned. Build on your resilience, also your network and mentoring. Thank you, Sylvia.
Oh, thank you, Anna. Building on a lot of what Anna said, for me, it really starts with confidence. And I was really grateful to be in the Girl Scout Cookie program because I learned a lot about how do you set goals and create opportunity for yourself. But also my troop leader told me, never walk away from a sale until you've heard no 3 times. And that was so invaluable because as a 7-year-old girl, I began developing that muscle of how do you get around a no and turn it into a yes. And so I began developing that. So when people told me I couldn't be an engineer, I just went on and became an engineer. And that's an invaluable skill. So that builds confidence when you can create opportunities and you're going to find a way to make it happen. That makes you incredibly confident. And so that's very important, especially in tech. You got to be confident. I think the other thing is learn how to tell your story. And when you tell your story, you have to do it in a way that adds value. I learned that early on as a young facilities engineer at IBM. It was the only engineering job I could get in all of Silicon Valley. And if you think about it, facilities engineers, it's great, but really you're so far away from where, the sales and marketing or the action's happening. But I've told myself, I got my foot in the door and I'll work my way up. But one of the things that I learned was one of the managers I was laying out the manufacturing design. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm putting the equipment around." He goes, "That's not what you do. You're really optimizing the factory output and you're reducing costs." I was like, "Oh, okay. I like that. I can do that." And it really taught me to reframe whatever I did in a way that added value to the company. And that is an invaluable skill. And also about failure, because we do fail, especially in technology. You're moving fast, you're innovating. You have to, in Girl Scouts, we used to call failure first attempt in learning, FAIL. So how do you reframe that? And you realize in any company, in any organization, there's a lot of people doing something. So when something doesn't work, it's a process or a system that failed. And then if you take a leadership position, you say, "Let's figure out how to fix this," that's great. But the other thing that is important is also touting when you and your team had success. And a lot of times we don't do that. We're really humble. It's very important. Again, it's not making it all about you, but it's a whole system and a process that was successful. And every company wants to scale and replicate success. If you learn how to tell that story about how it added value, you are seen as the leader doing that. So I think those are a couple of really key things that were so invaluable in my career, as well as persistence. I mean, I gotta say, being one of the first, being a trailblazer, there wasn't an ERG, or I was the ERG, I guess. And so you really got to be incredibly persistent and figure out ways that you can get to the yes.
Amazing. We heard persistence, resilience, we heard confidence, and I like all of our women in the audience. You are adding value, so tell your story. Love it. Thank you. So now you are both on tech company boards. So Sylvia, when did you decide to pursue a corporate board, or was this, tell us how you landed your first board seat? Is this something that you were thinking about, or what was that step like?
Absolutely. I did always want to be on a corporate board. And also because I just hit the glass ceiling in technology. I kept trying to get up there and never got to the CEO level, got to the executive level, but not the CEO level. Then when I became the CEO of Girl Scouts, I realized we really had a STEM gap, a workforce gap in the US. And so again, the message I told, the value that Girl Scouts could provide is it had a national network that could train girls in STEM. That mattered because then we partnered. Who cared about that? Technology companies. So I was able to talk about that. We were able to raise a significant amount of money, created 126 new STEM badges, robotics, automotive, cybersecurity. Over 1 million girls got STEM badges my last year, 2019. But why that mattered is I was talking about the value add and solving a big problem, a strategic problem. How do we close the workforce gap to be globally competitive? That is what corporate directors do. So along the way, as I'm pitching and getting funding, I meet not only just a corporate board member, he's actually the chairman of the board. And so when I said, okay, 4 years enough, I've been 8 years on the Girl Scout National Board, 4 years CEO, time to step down. He was my very first call, literally phone. He reads the note, calls me up and says, "I want you to be on the board." But he saw that I could think strategically, big vision, big problem solving. So those things are really important.
Well, continuing to add value, certainly at the Girl Scouts with the new badges, and thank you for sharing that story. Anna.
Yeah, so for me, it was interesting. I always branded myself as a transformational leader. And to Sylvia's point, you talk about the value that you provide, and you need to be able to tell the story of who you are, because boards want to know what value and who you are, and how you're going to behave on that board, what you're going to bring to the board. My story was really about transformation, and I had the opportunity to meet with the board members for Aptiv. They were my first board. And that was an interesting meeting because this is a company that was going from electromechanical things to more software. Think about the car. They basically provide the compute and driver assistance and the sort of technical capabilities within a car and cabling and others, right? And they were looking for somebody to join the board that had gone through this journey of sort of electromechanical to software, somebody that would bring that software expertise. So, I had the opportunity to meet them through a colleague who had worked with me before, who had seen what I can bring in terms of strategy, in terms of transformation, the transformations that I had led before. And that was the introduction that was made to the Aptive board. And to Sylvia's point, being able to talk about the value and that value aligning to the mission of the company, and then them seeing also that it's not a point in time value that you're adding, but that you'll be a strategic player on that board and on that journey of the company for a period of time, right? So that's how I joined that board. But it started, by the way, and I would say to all the folks in the audience, it did start about 10 years earlier, when I sort of had this view that, hey, maybe I can be on the board, and maybe I should be preparing myself to be a board member. I didn't, when I was a VP at one of the tech companies I worked for, and somebody had asked me, hey, do you think you can be on a board? And it had never really occurred to me. But at that time, I started to be part of nonprofits. So I think in order to be on a board, on a public company board, it serves you well to start with being a board member and showcasing that you can be on a board and you can be a contributor, and a nonprofit. I was on the board of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Computing, and being there for 15 years. I also ran the compensation committee there. So I would say to everybody on the audience, while you can aspire to be on a public company board, it's always great to start with just being a board member and contributing in a nonprofit, for example, and then you can go to private boards, and then you can go to public boards. There is a little bit of a journey, and through that learning, you become an even better board member over time.
Well, what a great transition to the next question. It's actually, let's go ahead and stay with you, Ana. So you gave us some tips already for what a path might look like for how Latinas can build a path to becoming a director, and what do companies look for, and what do they value in the boardroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is they value having a great board member relationship with the other board members, and I've felt that the fit that I can have as part of a board and the skills that I bring to the board. Boards tend to be about 10 people or so, depending on the board size. And so they're looking for diversity of skills and diversity of experience on the board. So that, I think, is really important. And remember, Esther, what's the function of the board? The board is not the management team. There's a CEO and a management team for the company. So the board is there to provide governance for the company. And governance can mean things like hiring and firing a CEO. It can mean looking at the audit and the financial, ESG and other governance, and risk areas for a company. It can be the compensation elements, making sure that the CEO is appropriately compensated, and that other folks on the leadership team and the compensation philosophy is the right one for the company. So, what boards look for is they look for people that have had different types of experience to bring to the board, but can also sit on these committees. The boards have committees around each one of these areas, and really add value as part of that, of those governance committees as well.
Great. So Sylvia, we heard a little bit about the role of the board versus the CEO, and also some of the committees. What are your insights for our Latinas, and what committees have you served on?
I think Anna brought up some really great points. And I think being on a nonprofit board, and even if you can get on a national, that gives you so much great experience that is very transferable to a corporate board. So really important. If you aspire to be on a corporate board, you got to know some finance. Doesn't mean you're going to be a CFO, but really that's what you're looking at. You're looking at the financial statements of an organization. And while it seems incredibly prestigious, remember, you are responsible as a corporate board. The board, it stops with you. You could fire the CEO, as Anna said, and it is your board responsibility. So it is a very serious position. And we're certainly seeing that with what's going on with Ukraine, and corporations and boards are coming together and making some pretty serious decisions. So those are the kinds of things you do. And so I think having that finance, but also being collegial, and Anna sort of referred to that. How do you work with others? How do you come together? You're not operational. You're really not operational. You're really strategic governance. And the Qualcomm board I'm on is incredibly high functioning. When there's big strategic issues like around the supply chain, because it's a semiconductor firm, we came together, identified the big issues, and then we all came to consensus, and then we let management run. We didn't oversee them. We weren't looking over their shoulder. It's their job to run, to operate the business. So being able to sort of see what the difference is and being comfortable with that. The other thing is how you ask questions. You're not in an operational role. It's your job to be able to get the best out of the business partners. And so I think that's incredibly important. And then there is one employee that reports to the board, and that's the CEO. And so being able to really help that CEO do the best that they can do is so important. And I'm on the governance committee of Qualcomm, and I'm also the chair of the governance committee on Credo Semiconductor. So I'm heavy duty into the semiconductor world and all that's going on with that. But I would really recommend, really think about, how do you ask questions in a way that adds value? At the board level, you're not asking gotcha questions. You're not trying to prove how smart you are. Everyone gives you that. You are. So your questions have to add value for the organization and also for the board. So, thinking about how you ask questions, how you think about issues strategically, and certainly getting a beat on finance is really important, so that you can read financial statements and are very, very comfortable with that.
Today, there's probably more topics and more issues that come before the board. Certainly companies are dealing with a lot of risk, a lot of change, and COVID certainly turned everything upside down in many ways. What are you seeing in terms of the workload that's involved? And you've got individuals who may be sitting executives like Anna, who, when you're taking on a board, you might need to drop a lot of what you're doing if something urgent comes up. So tell us about the workload and how the pandemic impacted, how often you met and the types of topics you were talking about. That's a lot, but I know you all have been living this. You're going to be writing some books about it.
I think so. I can start, Esther. So first of all, I do have a full-time job and I'm on boards as well. And I've been very thoughtful about the load, in effect, that boards take, and having that right balance. COVID actually helped me a little bit because one of my boards has 3 meetings a year in Dublin. And then 2 meetings in the US. And interestingly, during COVID, we met remotely. We were still meeting and doing so remotely. And we were able to prove out that certainly a lot of those conversations can happen remote. But frankly, we were still missing the side conversations, the things that happen on a board where you really try to find out kind of what's happening maybe on some other committees or really how people are feeling. It's hard to have those conversations remotely, so, but I think it worked really well. From a workload perspective, to answer that one, there's so much that has happened over the last 2 years. If we think about it, I'm sure Sylvia, you talked about supply chain issues. We've each had to deal with movements around the world in the US, whether it's social movements and what do we do to respond to things like Black Lives Matter, et cetera, or, the Ukraine and global movements, or, just things about financials, what's happening with acquisitions or divestitures or things like that. I'm on the 5-9 board, and we were almost acquired by Zoom, right? So we went through that discussion while going through COVID, and the board had to meet, right, to be able to vote and make the right decisions there. So from my perspective, I feel like there were a lot of issues that we had to tackle over the last 2 years. It required us as board members to spend a little bit more time, but being remote actually allowed for a lot more flexibility, from my perspective, to be able to do that. And I think it worked out okay. I think going forward, though, my sense is that boards are learning to be able to be hybrid as well. I think there's going to be a little more tolerance to this hybrid way of working, right? Which will allow for some off-cycle meetings, that boards might need, that maybe perhaps before we were a little more hesitant to do.
Yeah, and building on what Anna said, one of the companies, Credo Semiconductor, went public, and it's one of the few tech companies that have gone public this year. Remember last year, the IPO market was like booming. I joined at the end of last year. It's looking really good, and December starts happening, and it begins to crumble, the IPO market opportunity, and then January. So my holiday was there were a lot of Zoom meetings. And we, leading into January, late into the night, because we have half of our board are folks in Asia. So you have to accommodate their schedules as well. So sometimes we're the ones getting up early, and sometimes, they're the ones staying up really late, or vice versa. And, so it is sometimes, incredibly intensive. I was also on the board of a small private company, Dynamic Signal, that was acquired. And, in that, there was an opportunity for me to really contribute, because I'd had a lot of sales experience, and I realized there was a gamemanship going on. So you really get involved in it. Again, that's a lot of time. Those are meetings you can't miss, because those are board strategic meetings. I mean, those are the big issues. So sometimes it can be really time intensive, but other times it can be not as time intensive as well. I really encourage people to sit on the audit committee. I sit on the audit committee. I don't sit on it, but I attend the audit committee meetings, because that's where all the good stuff of what's happening has to be reported. So you get a lot more insights than just what the committee reports. Not that there's anything to hide, but you'll get much more in-depth information. So I really encourage people to sit on the audit committee as well. COVID did impact, and just, as Anna said, we did a variety of things, hybrid as well as in person. And we're really trying to do more in person than in, over virtual. But the final thing I'll talk about is that, we've had an amazing 50 years post World War II, where a lot of the businesses were able to sort of, yes, there were challenges and fluctuations, but it was within sort of a bandwidth. The things the transformation that is going on around the world, it is geopolitical as well as a move to the digital, economy. All those things are massively disruptive. So what you're seeing is big shareholders like BlackRock and others, they are not going to allow board of directors to be on 5, 6 corporate boards anymore. They're going to vote against you. So you're going to be on 3, maybe 4 corporate boards, because they recognize it to do a good job. it's not just going to a few meetings and sort of telling the CEO, yeah, I like the plan. I mean, these are strategic issues that companies are working on, and they want to make sure that their shareholders are getting the best from their board of directors. So you're really seeing a trend from people being on 5 or 6 corporate boards to just, 3 or at most 4.
Precisely. Anna, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I was going to say I agree with that, and I think one phenomenon that's happening with this digital transformation that's going on is that before it was okay for boards to meet like once a quarter, and the plans were a lot more predictable for companies. But if I think about what's happened over the last couple of years, and on the board of Aptiv, we are an auto tech company, and autos are going up and down, supply chains are shifting, right? Workers and what's happening to the labor market. So in a sense, boards have to contend with issues at a much faster pace too. So I think that level of dynamism is really requiring board members like Sylvia and I to be much more present in the issues that a company has, even at a governance level, but it's going to require more of board members. And I think it's a good thing actually that there's a little bit of a limit in terms of how many boards one can be on, so that we can really focus on the boards that we're serving.
That is dynamic insight. And one of the things I was reporting earlier is, we've helped the Latino Corporate Directors Association help to nearly reach a historic 4-fold increase in Latino appointments, and half of them are first-time directors and 43% are Latinas. So we're seeing more of an appetite. One, what both of you mentioned, that investors don't want too much overboarding. That's the word, which that wasn't the case before. People stayed on a board forever, and it was hard. There were very few vacancies, and so I think that trend is helping us to diversify boards and bring that talent that can add value, and different perspectives, and just value add, period. So it's an exciting time. What an amazing conversation to hear from the both of you and the insights. This is a gem and a real treasure for everyone who's attending. So on behalf of Latinas in Tech and LCDA, thank you for spending your time. I know we're going to have move next to Q&A. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.